Hello, and a very warm welcome to our last of the 2021 VMG live webinars. Today, we will be exploring how to make the most of your practice lab. I am absolutely thrilled to bits to welcome, firstly, Rachel Lemcke, who is joining us today, but also his colleague, Rachel, who will be our guest speaker today. Thank you very much to everybody who's already sent questions in for Rachel. We are broadcasting live on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube and LinkedIn. All the platforms should have comments open, so if you would like to add live comments, live questions for Rachel, we are very open to that. Please do. And other than that, we hope you enjoy today's session. So live from rural New Jersey, I'm very pleased to welcome Rachel Lemcke. Rachel is the founder of Amwell Data Services, which is a consultancy specializing in lab optimization and growth. She has a very diverse scientific background and, as demonstrated here, a love of animals, and has years of experience as lab manager of a large equine referral hospital in the US. During her time in the industry, Rachel realised that many veterinary practices were not leveraging the lab services as well as they could for practice stability and growth. So from pricing analysis to equipment and test selection to improving workflow efficiencies, Rachel says she is dedicated to morphing the vet lab into a thriving, evolving asset for vets and their teams. And beyond the lab, she is an avid orchid grower and enthusiast, an amateur artist, and as you can see, a favourite co-worker of Sneakers the cat. So, Rachel, we are absolutely thrilled to have you speak to us today. And I appreciate with the time difference, it's very early in the morning for you. So we're very appreciative of that as well. So, if Sneakers will allow, I'm going to hand over to you to give us your 5 top ways to make the most of your veterinary practice lab.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate the warm introduction, and let me try to share my screen.
Yeah.
I have to do this with one hand.
I was going to say, I love that Sneakers is just chilling out there.
She can't hear us. She can hear me, but you know, she's apparently very happy right now. So.
She looks pretty comfy there.
She is, for sure. Are you able to see the slides I'm about to bring up?
Yep.
Okay, perfect.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Rachel.
Okay, as Hannah said, my name is Rachel Lemcke. If I yawn, please forgive me. It's 7 a.m. where I am. So these are 5 practical ways to start getting the most from your laboratory services. This kind of applies to in-house and reference laboratory testing. I'm going to try to do this one-handed. So this presentation is designed for veterinary teams that are starting to optimize their lab services. These are all sorts of recommendations that fit a variety of practices. Some are kind of more specific to other practices. So while they might not fit your particular practice, they might fit a practice down the road. And these are supposed to be pretty actionable items that maybe could be implemented sometimes this week or within a month. These are meant to be conversation starters, and they will cover operational parts of workflows as well as financial business components. So, like Hannah said, my name is Rachel Lemcke. I call myself an independent veterinary laboratory consultant, which is a real mouthful, but I advocate for veterinary teams, and I help them optimize their lab services, whether that's in-house, reference lab, or a combination of the two. This is what I focus on, and this is what I love. My why is I think that careers in vet med should be hopefully more sustainable, and I want to do everything I can to help that. Especially here in the US, we have a labor shortage that I'm sure you guys are also familiar with. And so I particularly have worked with dozens of equine veterinarians, and in the US in particular, a lot of them leave equine practice, sometimes leaving veterinary medicine altogether, but they'll also move to small animal practice for a better kind of work-life balance, if you will. But I work with not just equine teams, I work with small animal practices as well. So for some background on me, I have a bachelor's of science from Berry College, which is in Rome, Georgia, not Rome, Italy. I wish that would be nice. And I have a master's from Cornell University up in Ithaca, New York, also in animal science. So I have a lot of experience in a laboratory, both a veterinary laboratory and a non-veterinary laboratory. And I do have a publication and research record. Some of that is ongoing. I just received a grant from the AARV over in the US, American Association of Rehabilitation Veterinarians, with a former colleague to study Lyme disease in sport horses. But my practical experience has been for nearly 4 years. I updated and transformed an in-house large laboratory of a private equine referral hospital here in the Northeast US. Okay, so let's get started on these 5 practical things. So number 1 has to do with on-hand supplies. And the first suggestion I have about on-hand supplies is to cut waste. Sometimes free supplies are available. In the US, IDEXX can provide a variety of free supplies, even through COVID, which is really nice. It can include like blood tubes and pipettes, all sorts of stuff for both laboratory services and stuff that can be used actually kind of more within the practice or the exam rooms. But if free supplies aren't an option, or if you're already doing that, you can kind of better track your supply needs in terms of inventory and help you plan. I say that because some practices experience some levels of seasonality versus other types of practices. So if you know, like for example, for equine practices or mixed animal practices, if foaling season is coming up, then you want to make sure you have IgG supplies on hand and things of that nature. So kind of monitoring inventory can help, especially with quote unquote busy seasons. And then for things that are not frequently used, for tests or equipment that aren't used often, sometimes you'll be running more QC on the machines than you would be tests, and that can actually increase the cost per run. So that's just something to keep in mind. So, you might want to basically, I don't want to use the phrase trim the fat, but consolidate things that maybe you aren't using as much. Second thing about on-hand supplies is getting credit. So in my opinion, you should be getting credited for problematic or expired materials. In the US, IDEXX offers something called test promise points. And I know I've mentioned IDEXX now at least twice. I'm not affiliated with them or any other third-party diagnostic service provider. I've turned down offers of affiliation, commissions, that sort of thing. This is just my experience. Now, I know that I wrote in the US and not in the UK. I have tried to get in touch with IDEXX in the UK, and I have spoken with IDEXX representatives here in the US, and they cannot confirm if test promise points are offered in the UK. So in case they are, or in case they are not, I think it's still relevant. I think even if there's not a policy, like a formal policy like that, I think it's important to know what could be available to you if you ask. So for IDEXX specifically with this, anytime you have to run a dilution on the slides in the US, they'll give you credit for the slides that you used. So IDEXX also has like large clips, which are just stacks of slides. And sometimes if you have to break a clip apart in order to run dilution, they will credit you for that entire clip, which could be $30 or more. Also, if there is something that's not working, like if there's a slide jam in a machine and you lose slides, they will credit you the full cost of that. If something is broken, they have snap tests. If a snap test does not snap, they will credit you for that. Anything that expired within 30 days, they will credit. And they will credit in the US dollar for dollar. And they will also credit for anything that is sent to the reference laboratory that the results don't get back to you in time. So if they say it takes 5 to 7 days for a test to be run, let's just say, and it's day 8, they will refund you that entire amount. So I don't know if that policy extends to the UK, but you should be aware that it does exist, I guess, elsewhere in the world, and you should ask, right? You lose 100% of the shots you don't take. So in my mind, if something is faulty, even outside of vet med, the first thing you do is you go back and you ask for a refund. So don't be afraid to do that here. Okay, one of my favorite things for on-hand supplies is to use for training. So you have two good ways to do this. One is fully expired supplies. Can be used for partial protocol training, depending, because some machines will purposely not allow you to run expired product. But they're great for training staff, for refreshing them. And then if supplies are expiring, like if maybe they expire today or tomorrow or this week, and you really doubt that you're going to need them for a patient, then that's a great way to support cross training, as you can bring someone in and walk someone through, and you can also probably still get credit. You should get credit for that item. And because expiration dates are known, that's a great way to plan upcoming cross training, even weeks in advance, like when you might have opportunities to do that, because we all know that med is significantly / severely busy. So that might help provide some margin. So number 2 is cross training, conveniently enough. It's important, before I kind of delve into this, that I know that there's different types of teams. Where I was at a private equine referral hospital, I was the main lab person. But it was a 24/7 emergency hospital, staffed on weekends, staffed overnights, and they had a staff of about 50, and about 30 people were trained on laboratory equipment. So while I was the main lab person there was also a very big team of people that were capable of stepping in after hours or if I was out. So there are many practices that don't have a specific point person for labs, but instead use like a big team approach or a small team approach. So this is relevant to actually all of them. So for practices that use like a team approach, I really feel like cross training is sometimes overlooked in practice. I know everyone's really busy, but this really helps it really helps kind of protect your team in terms of delegating, in terms of relieving pressure, relieving bottlenecks. So a great rule of thumb is, what can you not delegate? So for me, that is note you and not are both bolded. So for me, I think about when I was the lab manager, basically, what can I train someone to do and what can I not train someone to do? I can even train someone to think like me in in particular workflows if I need to, but most people can delegate most activities. So for example, just because a surgeon can run blood work doesn't necessarily mean the surgeon should run blood work. Just because an internal medicine specialist can run blood work doesn't mean they should. Just because a veterinary nurse can doesn't mean that particular person should in that moment. So, the more the team knows how to help each other, different workflows to help each other, the more they can support each other. So what I mean by a supported skill set is cross-training that is regularly scheduled and that is thorough and preferably one-on-one in my experience. And I've lost count of the number of people I've trained, but we'll just say dozens and dozens at this point. When I would train in groups, I would find that the dominating personalities of one or a few of those group members would come through, and there would really only be like one machine to do something. It's not like you have a dozen machines probably to run the same task. So they would have the hands-on practice, and the other team members would just stand there and go, and they would only get the visual and the auditory. But I've learned that a lot of veterinary team members are hands-on, they're tactile, they want to do it, and they remember best when they do it. So for me, I always prefer to teach one-on-one, and that way they at least have that tactile memory. And I like to do this once a quarter, because like I said, at large practice where I was, there was a huge staff of 30 or so technicians that could run blood work, but if you run blood work only like twice a year, your confidence might not be there. There might be errors. So anything that I could do to support that with regularly scheduled cross training, I think is really helpful for the entire team. So number 3 is cost-based pricing. So obviously this is a little bit more on the business side. So many practices use what's called a multiplier to determine their lab pricing. And that is based off of, quote unquote, like the list price or the book price. But sometimes it's like list price times 2 or times 2.5, or depending on the situation and the level of triaging, it might be higher. But that makes a lot of assumptions. It assumes that all of your costs are going to be captured within that umbrella all the time. And we know, especially COVID has shown us, that our costs are not static. And so that gets kind of risky, because if you cut out, if that umbrella doesn't capture what it needs to, then you've not covered your expenses potentially, and you've also lost that profit that you were planning on, which is kind of hard, because this profession is all about serving, but the way we do that is we continue to serve. So it's important that the business aspects of it support our mission. So cost-based pricing is a detailed breakdown of, this is everything that it takes to run this particular test, and then here's the profit I want to make on top of that. So this is I'm a big fan of the Great British Baking Show, and this is a social media post I made thinking about pricing and expenses like cupcakes. So hopefully someone can find some humor with that. So I have found that cost-based pricing does 3 things beautifully. Number 1, your team actually like gets all the credit they deserve in terms of like covering all their expenses. You're not cutting yourself short, and you make the entire level of profit that you want, not just hoping that there's some leftover in that umbrella. And it's a great way to see what discounts do with your practice. Some practices are pro discounts, some are anti-discounts. Some don't know what they think about discounts, and that's fine. But if you discount too much, you will automatically eat into your profit, and sometimes you cut yourself short. So I find it's really helpful for that. And I get asked a lot, so how the heck do you do this? And I like to think about it as everything that it takes to run a particular test from start to finish, including labor, including machine purchase or lease price, including QC costs, including supplementary supply costs like pipettes or sample cups, could be blood tubes. That would be perfectly relevant to put in there. Some of these things will cost like a penny in the US, but a small amount, but that adds up over time. And so I know that this can be like a little daunting. So I have a template, a COGS template that is available as part of an online training that I have on my website, and I'm happy to give that free to anyone watching, the whole thing, not just the template. So I'll talk about that more at the end, but the code will be VMG. So that's a big detailed template, Excel spreadsheet with automatic formulas, and it's a great way to help you get a handle on how to kind of more realistically or more accurately price testing. So you can use cost-based pricing to kind of guide your decisions of where you're going to send testing, whether you're going to keep it in-house or send it out to the reference lab. So when you actually know your practice's costs versus someone down the road or on the other side of the country, you will say, okay, it costs my team, let's just say $15 total, excuse me, after I account for all expenses, $15, the equivalent of dollars, but 15 to run a test, and it's cheaper at the reference lab. So then you can decide, okay, well, because it's cheaper there, I'm going to send it there. Then that frees up your technicians or your nurses' time to do something else. But it's important to remember any contractual obligations you might have, particularly regarding like in-house spend or in-house volumes, because if you kind of don't want to get into tricky water, we'll say, related to contracts. So fourth is missed billing in the lab. It is not a happy subject, but that is a very happy dog. So slightly ironic that I chose that picture. So why does it happen? It's probably one of my biggest frustrations for veterinary medicine as a whole. And the shortest answer is why it happens is permissive workflows and software. So that means either you have like a PIMS or a veterinary management practice software that's actually not integrated with your equipment. What I mean by that is sometimes it can be integrated like one way, as in send a request to the machine, but it won't put the results back in. But sometimes it'll communicate both ways, and it will actually put the results back in. But that is a great way. An integration is a fabulous way to try to cut down on loopholes and make sure that these things are getting billed. The second thing I see happen are that predetermined quote unquote bundles or like charges that are automatically populated, if that makes sense. So like if you're sedating an animal or you're catheterizing an animal, there are things involved, there are charges involved, and all of that can go together depending on software. And the third thing is loopholes or irregularities in software or team activities. All of this I'm speaking from experience. When I joined practice where I was a lab manager, they had a software that could have been older than me. And it worked okay. It worked great for some things, but it was very clumsy and it did a horrible job at capturing billing. We changed to a new software. It's pretty good. I wouldn't say it's amazing, but it's light years better. And it did have bundles, and that was great. And so I think a lot of people thought the misbilling problem would just disappear, but it didn't. And here's two reasons why. Number one, I live in a rural area, like she said. There are trees around and there are fields, and for whatever reason, we have horribly fantastic power outages here. And that practice didn't have a generator for decades. So we would lose power for hours and hours on end. And it was a 24/7 practice with emergency patients and also an ambulatory department. So some healthier patients too. But when you lose power, you lose your technology. So that's a great reason to have contingency plans, especially for laboratory services, where you can still write everything on paper, even if you're fully digital, for situations like that. And also team activities. Like I said, it was a 24/7 emergency practice. And so they would have a skeleton crew at night and a skeleton crew on the weekends. Well, if a patient comes in and they're seizing, you're not going to stop to think about, did you bill that CBC on the patient from this morning? No one will ask that in 1,000 years, maybe except for me. But so because teams are so busy, And it doesn't have to be 24/7 practices. All practices are extraordinarily busy right now, from what I have seen, from what I have heard, from what I have witnessed. But when teams are really busy, things are more likely to fall through the cracks, even if they have integrated software, that sort of thing. So we know it's obnoxious, but what the heck can we do about it? So seal the leaks from biggest to smallest. So first thing is integrate that lab equipment. You can speak with me if you need to. You can speak with your, like the PIMS software. You can speak with your laboratory equipment teams, those third parties. And then that's number one. And then number two, I think it's really important to troubleshoot two types of billing areas. Number one, the things you do the most often, and number two, the most expensive things. The things you do most often, those are going to compound the most. So if, let's just say you're $1 off and you do a procedure 1,000 times, that's $1,000, even though it was only $1 a time. But if it's the most expensive, let's say it's a $400 test and you only do it twice a year, but that's $400 a clip and that's $800 total. So it's really important to watch most common, most expensive. And then you should also audit, like invoice your system logs and make sure that everything is working as it should be. Last thing you want to do is realize that billing's been off for quarters. So, fifth practical thing that could be implemented right away would be organization. What I mean by that is think of the lab space or any space that you're performing any lab services. For example, Sneakers, who's now down on the floor, Sneakers had to see a dermatologist a couple months ago, and the dermatologist had a cytology station right there in the exam room. She had her stain, she had her scope. It was fabulous. I took a picture. I was very excited. That was super efficient for her, for me, for the cat. We didn't have to move the cat anywhere, or she didn't have to leave and go, take slides somewhere. So it was lovely. So it's important to think about creating efficient workflows in current spaces and also future spaces. So here are some examples that I have found to really help in practice. Move equipment to reduce walking. That might sound strange, and it's okay with me if you laugh at that. For example, I reorganized. One of the things I did for practice was I reorganized their lab. They had a freezer and a fridge over here, and then they had a machine on the other side of the room that used frozen reagents. And so the person who wanted to run this machine would load their sample, walk all the way to the freezer, and then walk all the way back, which is fine if you're trying to get your steps in, right? But that's not really great for workflow efficiency. So I took that machine. It's hard to move freezers. I took that machine and I put it right next to the freezer. So it's just stand here, open the door, do this. Done. Second thing is anticipate the next steps by the workflow. So like a CBC, you might put it on a rocker. Some people can just homogenize it by inverting, but you might have a rocker, and then you would put it in a machine, and then you might do a PCB. And so you think about all these components and these steps and try to put things together by workstation. It also helps to have a printed protocol. Many teams already have these, but a printed protocol that's available for people that don't regularly run this, right? Just because you run CBCs and chemistries really well doesn't mean you run SNAP tests really well, for example, or something else. That's where that supported kind of thorough cross-training comes into effect. So also, in terms of organization, it's fabulous. It's very exciting to me that VetMed is now starting to embrace some kind of advanced levels of technology. So some PIMs are really advanced, some telephone systems are advanced, and it's a really great idea to consider replacing paper submission forms and things like that with anything digital or automated. And the beauty of that is that you can, is automation. The beauty of that is so that you don't have to do it anymore. So there's a very large practice that has related practices that's client of mine, and they have a PIMS that has worked okay for them, but in the past, but they're exploring new options for PIMS, but they kind of have this like, what do we do in the meantime issue. So I created basically a complementary digital connected workflow where I connected like 5 different programs for them, so that now the technicians don't have to physically send the results to the doctors. It's a 15 doctor practice. Now they just have to put one link into an Excel sheet, and then it will automatically send everything to the doctor. And they have digital submission forms, and so it's replaced a lot of what they have to do on a regular basis in terms of just making their lives easier. So to summarize, I feel like I kind of flew through this, but to summarize, on-hand supplies, there's 3 things. Cut waste to get credit and train with them. Second thing is to support and regularly perform cross-training for any team member that might be running any blood work or handling lab supplies, like that could even include sending things out to the reference lab. Then consider replacing multiplier pricing with cost-based pricing to make sure that you're actually covering your costs and better capturing that profit that you want in order to keep caring for patients going forward. Number 4 is identifying correct areas of misbilling. And number 5 is improve both spatial organization and start utilizing digital and automated workflows if your team already is not doing that. So here's some resources. That's a picture of Sneakers being standoffish, and now she's over here wanting to go out. But so that's my email, Rachel@AMLDS, if you have any questions. And then I had mentioned a free COGS template. It's available as part of a very introductory online course that I have called the 30-Day Lab Makeover. You can find it on my website, AML Data Services, and there's a code, VMG, that will get you the whole thing for free, and that's a spreadsheet template that's 3 pages with automatic formulas, and it's built to make your life easier. So I will take any questions, and I have to figure out how to get back to the main screen.
That's okay, Rachel. We can do that for you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rachel, for a fantastically practical and useful session for us. There were so many scenarios that you were talking about there that absolutely certainly resonated with me from my time in practice, and I'm sure will resonate a lot with viewers. So thank you very much for some fantastically actionable tips. We do have questions coming in already. So wherever you are watching, you should be able to add your questions in the comments, and we'll put them to Rachel. So let's start.
I can answer them.
I'm sure you will. We've got some good questions coming in. So let's start with a fairly simple one. So, Rachel, what would you consider to be a reasonable time frame to contact owners with non-urgent lab results?
Okay, this is a great question. So I think of this like maybe wellness screens, things of that nature, sometimes parasitology results too, depending on the case. I think the best way to answer this is it matters what expectations you set with the client. I think depending on what you tell them, you should feel comfortable sticking with. I think that's reasonable too. But 3 to 4 days is not an unreasonable wait, as long as the client is aware of that. There are some veterinarians that will say, if for wellness screens or maybe for parasitologies, if you do not hear from me or from my team, it is good news, you are good to go. Basically, that's the default. So if there is an issue, we will reach out to you. That might be a great way to handle wellness screens, especially because hopefully most of the time we're not finding issues. And that would, maybe give some clients some peace of mind.
Okay, lovely. Thank you very much. Next question, more of a staff, maybe lab staff management question. Any advice on getting staff to appreciate the worth of the lab and be able to relay that to the client?
my heart goes out to whoever wrote this question. So doctors are amazing. Human doctors are amazing. Animal doctors, I think, are kind of more amazing because their patients cannot talk. So if you think about it, like their patients are always comatose if they were humans. Like, so they can't talk. So they can't say where it hurts. They can't say what's going on. They can't say how they feel. So diagnostics are their window into figuring out how do we fix them? How do we make them better? And there are ultrasounds, there are x-rays, but lab diagnostics are just as critical. That can tell you, even for healthy patients, that can maybe tell you of something that's coming up on the horizon that maybe you can stop before that happens. So I would say don't be afraid to communicate the value of, maybe as like a veterinary nurse, the value of what you do with the team. I hope that your own team appreciates everything that you do. I do, because I know it's not easy. So I appreciate that, but it's important that the pet owners, if you will, know that this is not a money grab. This is protective care in terms of like the patient's future, or this is like immediate trying to get answers, and this is the only way we know how to do this. Yeah. So I think there's like, we can have a whole other conversation about client compliance, but I think those are very relevant conversations.
There may be an upcoming webinar for that one. Okay, another question that will probably resonate with particularly our viewers who are working in smaller practices. So how can we best manage quality control in our small in-house lab? Any tips?
Okay. So some equipment you can buy QC for. That makes your life kind of easier. Some of that QC is just like a one level, like run this and it passes this one thing and it's good. Mm-hmm. Some equipment has a normal level of QC and then like basically sick one direction, sick the other direction. So they'll have 3 levels total. Some equipment has no QC, and that's not super helpful for this, but you can always kind of go back to a negative control and a positive control. So depending on the situation, you can take, basically blood, run your own QC in-house and, take a sick patient and a healthy patient and run it and make sure that what you're seeing correlates with what you're seeing clinically. Mm-hmm. So those are some options.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you very much. Another sort of staff question, and you did talk about this in your presentation. So what type of training do you recommend for part-time lab staff? So I think you've probably covered this one, but anything else to add?
I would make sure you cover the basics and then give them some guidance for the things that might be beyond a little basic. So I was at an equine practice, so this might ring a bell for some of your members. But the CBC and the chem will say are relatively basic. But I also taught them how to do abdominal taps, not the performing them, but running them and testing them, as well as synovial fluid taps, because those would happen, and those are also just as likely to happen in the middle of the night. So I wanted them to have like their basic set of knowledge and then an expanded set of knowledge on top.
Mm-hmm. So all about the training planning.
Yeah. Sometimes easier said than done, but yeah.
Oh, absolutely. And continuing the easier said than done theme, this one, I feel for you in many, many, many different situations, but I have definitely been this person. I'm sure this will resonate with a lot of people. Any tips on getting your vets to fill out their paperwork?
Ooh, that's a doozy. And I'm sure there are vets that are listening that are like, I don't do that. Well, maybe you do. I want to give that person a hug. So there's I have 2 answers to that. 2 parts. First part is you can make the workflows require it. I'll tell you how in a second. The second is that's also a management problem. So Now, if that vet is the practice owner, I don't know what to tell you in terms of the manager problem. But I don't know about that one. But for workflows, I actually have a client who has a fabulous veterinarian as part of their workforce, and she is not a fan of filling out paperwork at all. Like, here's the tube of blood, here's a blank piece of paper, read my mind type. And and the staff were not fond of that MO. So they had said to me, Rachel, we want to go digital with our workflows. And I said, sure. And so we made a digital submission form process for them. So there was no longer a piece of paper. And you might think, Rachel, what the heck's the point? Like, what's the difference? Well, the difference is you can't submit the form unless all the required fields are filled in. So she could maybe write NA, 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 NA for every single thing, but it's more likely that she's going to actually put the patient name in. That's a great place to start. I've heard. And maybe the owner. That's also helpful. Also, what tests are requested. Like, let's start there. So that was a great way to like force someone's hand. So I will just say, keep that in mind. Beyond that, I'd say it's a management thing, especially because I'm sure people have conversations regularly about, hey, would you please fill out this paperwork? And they say something to the extent of, yeah, and it never happens. So
yeah, I'm sure that will resonate with a lot of people, particularly the mind reading blank form. Here's your blood tube or whatever.
And I will say, if I can add this, I will say there was an internal medicine specialist that I worked with, and I worked with him on a daily basis for years. And he would do very advanced tests and diagnostic panels. And because I was a lab point person for him, we worked together for hours every day. He would see me, I would see him. So he could say to me, Rachel, I want the works for this patient. And I knew what that meant. But if he said that to anyone else and the entire practice, they'd be like, the works on a sandwich, on a pizza? Like, I don't know what you want. So I would know, that's these 6 tests and do them all or send them all out. And I would know that. But unless he communicated that to someone else, no. So depending on the situation, but he's also, so he rarely ever filled out his paperwork. He would just tell me, but I understood him. So that was a little different.
Yeah, there's definitely shades of that one, isn't there? I've very often heard this, well, here's the blood tube. What are you doing with it? Well, I saw Mrs. Smith this morning, so obviously, yeah.
Or it's one of those, and sometimes you'll have like blood work that's held, right? This happens a whole lot. Like, we're going to hold it and we don't know if we're going to run it.
Right.
So that situation, I check in, maybe that day or at the end of the appointment, and I'll keep checking it. Because sometimes they forget about it, depending on the case. And that's fine if they forget, but you want to make sure that the client was not expecting something, or that could be awkward for the practice.
Absolutely. Okay, I hope, person writing that question, I hope that's given you a few tips. Where are we? Let's have another slightly more technical lab question on slide prep, this one. So I need tips on cytology slide prep and staining, especially for tape strips and ear swabs.
Okay. The biggest thing I saw that was an advantage to prep for cytologies was the way they were made. That sounds like circular reasoning, but what I mean by that is sometimes you want a deeper, like a thicker layer of cells to look at under the scope. And sometimes you just want a monocellular layer. So sometimes you just want cells that aren't really even touching much, so that the stain, very important, can get all the way through properly, and because you're also looking for particular colors, and that helps you identify what you're looking at. So you want the staining to be pervasive enough, and then you also want to be able to actually see what you're looking at with the light from the microscope. So if things are stacked, you can't look at it. So I'm trying to think if I don't have any slides. We're going to pretend these 2 pieces of paper are slides. So to make microscope slides, to make really helpful slides, this is less helpful for something that is hard, like a mass. So let's think of this like a fluid, or like even like an ear swab. That would be fine. So you would smear or drop whatever you want on the edge of a slide, and I tend to do that towards like the frosted edge. And then I take a second clean slide. I take the edge, kind of like I'm going to make a blood smear or blood film, and I dip it or lay it in the or squash it if it's like kind of harder into that puddle or drop or smudge that I made, and then I will let it wick along the entire length, just like a blood film, and then lift up, and then I'll move over a couple millimeters and place it back down, and then pick it up and move over like a millimeter and a half, place it down, pick it up, and keep going. So my slide will have tiger stripes on it that get gradually narrower, and that will give you a big, large area where your staining will probably not be perfect, so you need to keep that in mind visually. But sometimes some organisms or different cell types maybe might be too heavy, or basically might be more predominant in a thicker area, like back in this main kind of blob or the starting point. And so you'll have your thinner lines, your monocellular lines, going out away from that. So you can compare, thicker, more kind of in vivo, I guess, more realistic in the body areas, and then also individual cells that you can see. So that has been the most helpful thing. But one more quick thing about staining, and I've worked with a lot of technicians over the years, and I've seen that many of them are trained when they're creating slides in terms of like dipping for like a modified dip quick, that sort of thing. When they're dipping slides, they do it for a certain number of counts, assuming all the counts are of equal length of time. So it will be, 10 counts on this, 8 counts on this, whatever, done. And I find that that's less helpful, depending on the sample type that you're actually using, that it's most helpful to go by eye, kind of like cooking. You kind of like go by like a flavor profile, and you can kind of work off, it's not baking, this is cooking, like you can kind of like modify the recipe, add salt and pepper as needed, that sort of thing. So like for me, like I stain until the slide looks a particular way for that stage, because some of the material is thicker and it will take longer to absorb, if that makes sense. Like a trach wash, a nasty trach wash is going to be thicker, or if you're going through pus, it's going to be a lot thicker than if you're going through like a corneal ulcer swab, like unless it's fungal. But so you go by color, not by count. That's the short answer.
Good tip. Lovely. Okay, I think that's there where we are with questions. So thank you, Rachel, so much for some fantastic advice and some great points that we can hopefully put into action straight away. And thank you very much as well for sharing some of your resources with us. I think that'll be fantastically helpful for people. So for those who are registered for the webinar, we'll send the link round later today if we didn't get a chance to jot that down. So thank you very much, Rachel. Apologies for the early start. We really do appreciate you joining us.
I'm glad my cat joined.
She did, yes. I saw her. She hopped up on the windowsill at one point, so she's just doing a little.
She wants to go outside.
A little bit in the background. That's fair enough. So this is the last of our webinar series for 2021. So we will see all of you again in January 2022. Our webinar program for 2022 is shaping up really well. We'll have sessions on developing future leaders, sessions on fee setting for services, on using client surveys, disaster planning, much more besides. If we won't see you before on our VMG Live webinars, we'd like to wish you a very Merry Christmas and a happy and healthy New Year from all of us at VMG. Thanks again to Rachel for joining us, and wish you a very happy rest of your Thursday. So thank you very much. Goodbye, everybody.